Start a small business. No need to work 40, 50 hours a week, slaving your life away. Obtain financial freedom, be your own boss, and create your own destiny. Moguls are the new superstars. The path to country club membership and a leased Mercedes-Benz is paved in gold as you take your business trips to Orlando or Vegas. Validation from your in-laws is just an LLC and Facebook business page away. At least, that's what they tell you anyways. Through social media, websites, and targeted ads, you're sold an image. Small business owners seem to walk on water. You'd think you're the last person on earth working a regular job with a regular boss. But there's trouble in paradise, and its name is in over your head. People start looking to start their own business, don't know what they don't know. But that's why we started our Small Business Confidential podcast, to share what we've learned from years of experience. There's not a lot of people in on this, so remember, dear podcast listeners, you heard it here first, off the record, on the QT, and very hush-hush.
Hi, everybody. This is Mike Riley with my partner in real estate and small business, Mike Ferrante. Mike, how you doing?
Fantastic. Good to be here.
All right. Well, we've been the last week or two. Mike's been he's been traveling Wilbury here. He's been all over the place, while yours truly has been home, tending to the home fires with the roller coaster weather here in Cleveland. One day it's 80, the next day it's 30. That's Cleveland for you. So,
yeah, never a dull moment.
Exactly. So Mike's been taking some good notes, and this topic's going to be kind of a smorgasbord. It touches on education, college, my favorite rant, to be or not to be, to go or not to go, to college. What's the impact? The allure of the glamorous business title versus are you actually making money? So we're going to be touching on accounting, tracking how well you're doing. Are you making money in your different ventures, et cetera, et cetera? Where do you want to begin? What ingredient you want to throw in the pot first here, Mike?
Wow, that's a good one. So, let's talk about this whole investing concept and how we were talking about education as an investment in your future, because that's the perception. Everyone thinks, oh, well, I pay now for an education because it pays off in the future. And, because we talk a lot about investing and different types of investing. So the concept of education as an investment, and what is the guarantee of that return, if any, and how do you quantify it? And are there other options?
Right. I think if you're going, let's just touch on the education part. I think the common myth, fallacy out there is you graduate from high school, you got good grades, and of course you're going to go to college, because if you don't go to college, you are a loser, right, Mike?
That's the perception. That's the perception. Yeah.
That's it. So let's just be aware of what the traps are right out the door. And, to me, I think going to college is fine. I think not going to college is fine. This is very complicated. And quite frankly, Mike, there is a reason. I was telling my son this, who's the controller of our company, who's now in his mid-30s. I was telling him the other day, there is a reason why there's a 1%, 2%. Think about it. 1% of America or 2% control 60% of the wealth in this country. What does that tell you? It tells you there is a wide gap in income in people. And I don't want, and you reel me back if I'm getting too far off the road here. But I think that nowadays, having your own business, if you read that great book, Millionaire Next Door, just go on Google about what is the percentage of people who are wealthy. And the vast majority of them, they have their own businesses. They don't work for somebody. And if you have your own business, one of the first things you have to be able to do is get the business, get the customers, right?
Yeah.
And if that's job number one, is to get the customers, you have to have some sales and marketing background, right?
Absolutely. It's like, just because you have a superior idea, superior product doesn't mean you're going to be successful. The old cliche about, build a better mousetrap and the world will beat a path to your door. Not true.
Right. You could build. I mean, how many people out there they're trying to hit that big home run, and they end up striking out. I think the irony of it is, when I look at the whole college experience, is they've got it upside down in so many different ways now. First of all, they're not teaching you any kind of sales course. That's number one. So here you got this degree, and okay, well, how are you going to market yourself? How are you going to sell yourself out there? Number two is, are you organized? Can you do spreadsheets? Can you figure out, how to, get that mousetrap, sell that mousetrap, build that mousetrap, hire people, subcontract out people to build that mousetrap? You see where I'm going?
Yeah. Well, and now some people are probably listening and saying, well, that's why you go to school. That's what an education gives you. But, from my personal experience, I found that my education, and I did a bachelor's at Heidelberg here in Ohio, and then a master's in business with a concentration in marketing. And, frankly, the education that I got didn't really do a great job preparing me for being out in the business world. I remember going to an interview right after, or right as I was graduating from Case Western, which was a wonderful school. I'm not just disparaging my education, because, one thing I'll tell you is I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. But I remember going to an interview with a railroad company, and they were the ones who gave me a full ride to Case. And I bombed that interview, Mike, because I was not prepared for the real world. I had a lot of book smarts, and I learned stuff, but I bombed that interview. Like, I was so awkward and not ready to sit down with business people and talk like an adult. It was embarrassing. I mean, frankly, I was embarrassed walking out of that interview.
Okay. Can you elaborate on that? Just
Well,
get a little bit more in the weeds on
yeah.
you bombing. Were you nervous? Were
Well,
you
yeah.
trying to impress them? I mean,
I can encapsulate the whole story with one little anecdote. And yes, it was all of that. I was still a kid. I hadn't really had a real job at a company. And this is where we start getting into apprenticing under someone, working and getting an education and getting paid for it. So I hadn't really done that. I had my own business. I took a similar path as you, and I was a college painter. That's how I started out. But
right.
when it came time to sit in a with business people in suits and ties, and they were talking about sales techniques and going into a customer's place of business, one of the questions they asked me, and I remember just sitting there, like my face probably turned red. They asked me, so Mike, one of the things we do is we call on manufacturers, for example, and that we're trying to sell them using our rail services. And so let's just say, you go into a customer's office, how would you find out what means of transportation they're currently using in preparation of going on that appointment? You got to know who your competitors are. How do you think you would do that? And I remember thinking, I have no freaking idea. And I just remember sitting there squirming, thinking, come on, Mike, you can come up with an answer. And I remember my answer was, well, I don't know, I would ask them. And probably not the worst answer in the world, but what they were looking for. And they kind of said, oh, one of the things we do is we just kind of show ourselves around. We'll go and walk around and look at their establishment, and maybe scout them out before we go there, and just see what trucks are pulling in and out, what rail cars are pulling in and out. And I just remember thinking, God, in a million years, I wouldn't have come up with that answer, because I just didn't know what I didn't know.
And you never took a sales class in college. They didn't even offer it to you.
That's correct.
I mean, and you know what? And that is, I want everybody to understand this one important point. When I talk about how college has now become a racket, just like these real estate courses that you see online that you can pay for, that you can buy, you can pay for a webinar, 99.9% of them are just, it's a ripoff. And, I think the whole college experience, that is a ripoff. What jumps out at me is the kind of coded messages that you get in the college experience. There is something sort of dirty, messy, it's kind of like teaching somebody shop, how to use a chop saw when it comes to having classes in how to sell sales course. Now we talked about this in past courses, whether you're in real estate, job number one is always understanding who your customer is, listening more than talking. That old sales expression. That's why God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth, right?
Right. Exactly.
It's all about listening. It's all about trying to understand, what they want. And the vast majority of people that are going to college, they come out of college with the thinking that A, I got a degree, and B, I got good grades. And that is a recipe for disaster. That's a recipe for failure.
Yeah, I agree. And Mike, to your point about sales, some people are probably listening saying, well, I'm not in sales. I do this, or I'm in accounting, or I'm the receptionist, or I'm in the warehouse, or I'm a delivery guy. Well, guess what? I say that every single person in the company is in sales. If you have any exposure to anyone outside the company, you're in sales, because whether you're delivering boxes to the customer, hey, that's your chance to do some good, to talk up the product, or to notice, kind of like those guys at the rail company where, hey, when you're there, you look around and see what's going on. And that's your opportunity to add value for your company. When you make yourself more valuable like that, hey, help them make a sale. Hey, I noticed they're still using this widget. Ours is better.
But Mike, think about that person out there. Hey, one of the listeners out there, you're saying, I'm not interested in selling. I'm working the warehouse. I got this. How do you think you got your job?
Yeah, because somebody sold something.
I mean, really, you went in for a job interview, right? Isn't that called sales?
Yeah.
The difference is, I want, hey, Mr. Warehouse or Mrs. Warehouse guy out there, or Mrs. Secretary, or Mrs. I want to work in the office person out there listening to this. Let me ask you a question. Do you want to be a chump, or do you want to be a player? Because a player, they in poker, they say, if you don't know who the fool at the table, you're the fool.
Right. I heard that.
The thing is like, sales is more than just this cliche of manipulation, to trick somebody into getting you something. That's not what it is. It's about awareness. Awareness. Is this product that I'm selling, is people buying it? Or maybe I should move out and not sell this? Or is this job going to work out for me or not? Is this boss somebody that I'm going to want to work for? The ability to have in your life toolbox, the ability to fix your own flat tire in your career, is one of the most important things you need in life. You need to be able to know what's going on. You're at the poker table of life, right? Is this a dead-end job? Is this college really going to teach you something that's going to get a job? Are you asking questions, or are you just blindly being the fool at the poker table and assuming that if you get good grades from a professor, that somehow you're going to be successful? Do you know anything about how life works? Have you read in Wikipedia the biographies of successful people? I can tell you one thing, 99% of the people that are super successful in Wikipedia, A, they dealt with failure, and B, it wasn't a straight line out of college into grad school to a job. That does not happen. And if you think it does, you are the fool at the poker table.
Yeah, and I'll add a C onto that. C, they likely had one or more really powerful mentors in their life.
Or family money.
Well, sure.
Yeah.
So, Mike, before I forget, one thought I want to throw in there is that, we're not, again, we're not saying that education has no value. For some people, that's the right path. But I think the key is that this isn't just this automatic entry into the perfect job. And I think it varies person by person, case by case. For some people, might be the right path, and then a master's and maybe a doctorate. But for other people, maybe it's military, maybe it is a government job, maybe it is like we always talk about, working for someone in the field that you want to be in, getting paid to do a job, and learning in the field.
Right.
The value of a
Right.
mentor can't be underestimated.
Right. And I think when you go into college, let's just say you're going into college. Okay. Let me give people some tips. One, why don't you take a year off before you go into college? Just take a year off. Get off the assembly line that you've been on for 12 years. Because if you've gone to high school, a real high achieving high school, my three kids went to private school, and all they were interested in was getting my kids into top flight universities. So the school would look good. Okay. And what, my middle son did, I just told him, you're taking a year off. He's not ready. He's doing too much partying, which he was.
Yeah.
And he took a year off. Now, I'm not saying it's the best thing that ever happened to him. I know I took a year off. I took a year off after mindlessly going 2 years to college straight from my, St. Ignatius parochial school. I took a year off. Best thing I ever did. Absolutely the best thing I did. Because you know what I did my third year? The third year, I left home and I went away to school at Ohio University. It's probably a 3-hour drive from my house, but it was far enough, but not too far. Took out a loan. And when I went down there after working all summer, painting houses, starting, Riley Painting and Contracting, which, by the way, Mike, next year, 50 years in the business.
Holy smokes.
50 years, folks. I started that 1974. Summer of 74. I was listening to the Watergate hearings on the radio. So that does date me. But I remember after that first summer, working Monday through Saturday, making some money, getting a loan to supplement, going down to school. School was a vacation from work. Even when I would go home for breaks in the summer, in the Christmas break, spring break, I was always lining up jobs. So when I went to college, I took all the courses that I wanted to take. Economics, radio and TV, which then led to, in 78, we started advertising on the classical radio station. And I took an accounting course. I took some advanced, almost graduate level political history, which I nailed everything. I nailed everything because I was studying stuff I wanted to learn more of. So I went into, and this is the most important thing, folks, I went into college that second time after that gap year. I was proactive about my learning. I wanted to learn. And when I got out of school without a degree, I had a business going, and I was still reading the Washington Post, which I switched over to the New York Times. I read the New York Times every day. Every day I was reading something. Every day I was building knowledge. So if you got me, 2 or 3 years, 4 years later, in front of those railway executives, I could hold a conversation with them. Think about that.
Yeah. That's the difference.
I could sit there and talk about, I just read this story a week ago in the Wall Street Journal about XYZ, and so that kind of knowledge of the world, that all-encompassing horizontal view of the world, is going to reveal to you options you didn't know existed. Your turn.
Well, so one of the things I wanted to throw in was, from my perspective, real estate school. Same exact thing. Real estate school prepares you to pass the real estate exam. It does not prepare you to sell real estate. So I think you have to look at what the education is and what it's really preparing you for, what the goal of the education really is. And that's one of the big things, one of your big points in mind about education.
Exactly. Yeah, it's too passive. And let me throw this out. Practice your your unconventional thinking. I mean, because if you are a person that's going, I got good grades in school, I took AP in high school, I got into a great college. Have you ever stopped and think, what is the chances of your success? What is the Consumer Reports show about a person like that ends up finding a successful job that they're happy in? There's no studies like that. You're just assuming this straight line is going to lead to, a happy lifestyle. And you know what? It may start out that way, but then all of a sudden a curveball is going to come. That curveball is going to come. You get laid off. You got a degree in journalism, and all of a sudden the newspaper in town is shut down, right?
Right.
And do you have a horizontal view of life? I mean, I watch, Morning Joe, MSNBC, White House Deadline. I watch, CNN, MSNBC, and PBS. And I watch all those shows, all the political shows. And you know what is amazing? The last 10, 15 years is the number of people that were in newspapers, columnists for the Washington Post, columnists for the New York Times, AP, Axios, Politico, all these online newspapers, how they're all on TV now. It's almost like their newspaper job it's not their main job. They are talking heads. And guess who's going to the college commencement or getting paid on the speaker's tour to pay to when you were at your real estate conference in Orlando, or was it Vegas? Where were you a couple of months ago?
Orlando. Yep.
Okay. Well, who was the speaker who got paid, $50,000 to talk? Anybody?
Yeah, I don't. Her name was Robin something. She's a adventure racer. So they actually brought in someone completely out of the real estate field, and it was more to talk about motivation. The drive to succeed, and really interesting gal. I'll have to look up her name so I can have it for you next time.
Hey, let's stop here. We got to pay some bills. 30 seconds, and we'll be back.
If you enjoy listening to our Small Business Confidential podcast, we're sure you'll enjoy our first podcast, The Cleveland Real Estate Investor. We give outside investors an inside look into the real estate market in Cleveland. Cleveland has been on the rise, and investors from all over see those cheap prices and salivate. Our job is to educate those investors and steer them in the right direction with several years of experience of how to do it right and many examples of how to do it wrong. Find the Cleveland Real Estate Investor podcast on any app you listen to your podcast today.
Well, 6 or 7 years ago, Malcolm Gladwell was on C-SPAN Book Notes with Brian Lamb. I think that's his name. But, I've taken up walking for an hour, at least an hour a day, and usually right before I go swimming laps for a mile. So I've really gotten to this good, healthy groove. And I go on YouTube and I just download all these interviews with people that happened 6, 7 years ago. Brian Lamb had Malcolm Gladwell on. And this was after, Tipping Point and The Outliers. And so maybe 4 or 5 years ago. Malcolm Gladwell, and he was a little uncomfortable when Brian Lamb brought it up, he makes $80,000 a speech. That's an hour and a half. Okay? That's an hour and a half. And plus they're flying him in. Plus they're putting him up at the Ritz, right?
Right.
80 grand. And now obviously he's Malcolm Gladwell. He's made his bones, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we were dating cheerleaders, but no, I mean, think about it. He's a writer. He's the New Yorker. He started at the Washington Post, went to the New Yorker. But this guy is doing a lot of broken field running, started writing some books that he was interested in, and now he's on the speaker tour. Okay? Because he's looking at life horizontally. He's looking for opportunity. Okay? Don't limit yourself to one career. Okay? That career could morph into 4 different careers. Talking head, speaker tour, writing a book. being an influencer. I mean, there are a lot of ways to go. But if you have been programmed 4 years in high school, 4 years in college to think linear, you're never going to see those opportunities.
That's right. So, hey, I found the name of this gal. She was really good, really great speaker. And I see one of the things that comes up when you pull up her name is she was in the top 50 keynote speakers in the world for 2020. Her name's Robin with a Y, Benincasa, Benincasa. Very inspirational. Great story. She was a fantastic speaker, and talk about someone who took her career in a different direction. She had to have I think it was a hip replacement and could no longer do the adventure racing, and now she's a speaker, and she was amazing. I left there very impressed. I'll never forget her speech.
What stood out in that speech?
Well, first of all, her skill at storytelling. So I think that marketing has evolved into storytelling over the years. We used to think, oh, what font, what colors, and now marketing is all about telling a story. So I could really get into detail about some of the exact stories that she told, but she was making points by telling a story. This is what happened. And first of all, the story was riveting. Her adventure racing is just an incredible sport, and to hear the stories and their innovations that they made in the field. But then she wrapped it up and said, and here's my point. But we're sitting there on the edges of our seats listening to her weave these tales, and there was probably 5 or 6 really amazing stories throughout it, and she kept your attention and then made her point. It was just incredible.
How did it influence you? What did you take away from that?
For me, it was definitely inspirational. And I think that, like we always talk about, realizing that there's, not to get into these ruts. So one of the things she talked about was the way they raced. And, like, for example, there's a stretch where they have to kayak. And, like at one point they said, well, you know what? One of the guys on the team said, why don't we rope the kayaks together and make like one big longboat out of them? And no one had ever done that before, and it took them 20 minutes to do it, so they lost 20 minutes. But at the end of the day, this out of the box thinking enabled them to pass the other teams. Like, they're flying by these other people who are all in their individual kayaks, and they have this 4 kayak longboat, and they're just like killing everybody because of this. And there was nothing in the rules that said they couldn't do it, but nobody had ever thought about it. So it was the whole idea of getting out of your head, getting out of the box. And I know we use that saying way too much, but to hear her story, I think a lot of us make excuses. We say, well, everything's been tried in my business. Real estate is one of the oldest businesses around. People have been selling real estate for years. There's nothing new. Well, you know what? That's because your limiting beliefs are telling you there's nothing new. Listen to this lady, and she'll tell you, about how they came up with these ideas. And it was inspiring to hear how they came up with these ideas that made them winners, because they were willing to challenge the status quo.
Well, one of the things that I wanted to touch on, be the last part of our inspirational podcast here, is the whole concept of trial and error, trying something out, thinking outside the box.
Yep.
When you ask somebody, do you have the ability to think outside the box? Are you an unconventional person? Most people will say yes. Well, of course I am. I'm not an idiot. Because that question implies that if you don't say yes, then you are an idiot. Okay.
Right.
But most people don't do that. And here's what you need to be able. One of the most important things is awareness. Is it working? Is it working? You have this house for sale, okay? And it's just sitting there. Now, are you going to default to the tired old realtor excuse that, well, the market's soft, right?
Right.
Or are you going to actually learn anything about what's going on? There's that should start in your head, asking questions, taking notes, giving yourself time to think. Okay. I mean, and then the most important thing, and this kind of loops back into what we're talking about with sales. What it is is you've got to get outside of your head into the person you're selling. Is this something they want to pay for at this price? And, we've talked earlier in earlier podcasts about, just, you're putting a house on the market, wash the windows, cut the grass, pull the weeds, put some flowers, make it, somewhat some curb appeal, pick up the garbage behind the house. And, if your realtor isn't telling you what to do, how to stage it without getting crazy, then you've got a bad realtor there who's just, basically painting by numbers. There's no thinking going on there. And I think when you're selling, if you're a real good seller, you're listening, but you're not listening to manipulate the person. You're listening to understand what they want. And that makes you, that loop of listening, building awareness, changing, is what leads you to think outside the box and to think unconventionally.
Right. Solve a problem, fill a need, educate. That's I think that's what selling really is.
And that's why the most important thing in life is to always be learning, always be reading. Read, listen to podcasts, have a smorgasbord of input coming into you, because that's going to make you carry on conversations with people naturally and not manipulatively, because you're generally curious. You want to know, hey, where are you from? Have you been here in Cleveland long? What exactly, how did you become a doctor? Or, what brings you to town? The realtor, you're talking to them. And when you build that familiarity, what they're going to do is they're going to tell you more and more what they want, because they like you. They like to do business with you because you're curious. I mean, I don't know anybody who's not, who doesn't like somebody who's curious about them, right?
Absolutely.
So if you're talking to them from, not a pressure sales campaign, but if you're talking to them in a certain way, asking questions, finding out, you're going to find out what's the problem here in them buying this house. And that's
Mike, there's another author here. It's Phil Jones. He's a Brit, and the book is Exactly What to Say. And it's a book about sales, and it's exactly what we're talking about. It's not, how to make people do what you want, but his whole premise is that sales is achieved through asking questions, not by telling someone what they want to hear.
Right. Exactly. I just wrote it down. Hopefully everybody rewind that. Okay. Phil Jones.
Yeah. I've listened to it 3 times now. I'm on my 4th go round with it. That's how good it is.
Right. Well, just again, have that smattering of stuff. And I think that is, and final note, before we wrap up is going back to college. It would be a great college experience is take a year off from high school, work, just, make money, save money, start building some, financial chops. Then go to school, but don't go to school with the assumption you're going to be there for 4 years. You may want to just be there for 1 year. Look at it as one big seminar. Don't get locked into, well, you got to take this course, you got to take this course. Just say, look, I'm going to be this year, I want to take these courses. And the courses you should take in that first year, they should be courses where you have already read half the books you're going to have to read. What does that tell you?
Yeah.
I took a course called The American President at Kent State my last year in college. I went from Ohio University to Kent State. I never should have taken that 4th year, but that's another story. But I remember going in there and taking courses that I wanted to take. And here I am, I'm reading the Washington Post every day. I'm getting it mailed to me. And I walked into a class, a senior level grad school class called The American Presidency. And that first day, the professor was asking me, does anybody know who's on the president's chief of staff? I kept raising my hand. raising my hand within about 15 minutes. He said, anybody except this gentleman here knows who's doing X, Y, and Z. But, it was just fascinating. Class became more like, going to a book club meeting or a fantasy baseball or football group. It was so much fun. And that is what school should not be about, getting a job. School should be about you learning all the different tools in life to be successful in life, how to find the right job. Okay? What do you like to do? What are you good at? Do you know how to handle money? Do you know how a lease is? Do you know how to sell? Because if you're a good salesman or good public speaker, which, by the way, Warren Buffett, the only certificate he has on his office wall is his Dale Carnegie public speaking degree. That's it. And this guy went to, business school, MBA, University of Nebraska, the whole 9 yards. None of them are there. But if you know how to sell, if you take a couple of sales courses, not even going to college, that is a tremendous tool. That's like a get out of jail free card. Or when we play, cards, what's that wild card?
Yeah, your trump card.
Your trump card. Whoops. But anyways, your final thoughts.
Final thought, Mike. I'm going to just wrap it up with a neat little bow, and I'm going to tell everybody how I know we're right. And how I know we're right. And ask any young person who has interviewed for jobs and ask them what they hear way too often. And this is the quote: "Sorry, we're looking for someone with experience." So ask your young people how often they're hearing that, and it's way too much. And the reason is that they just have the education; they don't have the other piece of it.
Right. And the way to bypass that, everybody, is simply this: listen, I'll sweep the floors. I'll do this. I'll be in the mail room. I'll do this. You get in through the back door, and then you work your way up. We're going to end on that note, Mike, because we're running out of time on Zoom here. So everybody, We're going to pick it up. We're going to pick it up next week with on the real estate side with the May heat check.
Heat check.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Small Business Confidential. To support, please follow us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Also add our podcast to your favorite streaming services. Everything is appreciated, and we'll be back soon with another episode and upload schedule. The person voicing the intro's name is Travis Riley. Thank you, Travis. And the music was done by our engineer, me, Amari.